This video is brought to you by my wonderful members and Super Chat sponsors. Click the join button to become a member. Hello, Mr. X. My name is Zach. I'm 31 and I've been a subscriber of your channel since 2017. Today I wanted to share a couple of experiences I had way back when I was 12. I have to admit, I really don't have any way of proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that these two instances are connected in any way. For all I know, they could be isolated from one another. Either way, I hope this true experience I had might be of interest to you. For context, I grew up in a small town in southwestern Kansas, USA. We had 4 outdoor dogs that we kept in the backyard, 2 larger dogs and 2 small ones. It's also important that I note that about 2 houses down the street from my family home, at the time, lived a family whose 2 sons were heavily involved with local gangs. The year was 2002. Like I said earlier, I was 12 years old. Full disclosure, I had been dealing with bouts of insomnia for weeks leading up to this incident, so I acknowledge the events I'm about to describe may have just been cerebral. On one particular evening, well after midnight, the dogs in the backyard started going nuts, howling and barking like crazy. My parents woke up and were making a fuss in the living room. Apparently, they were pretty frustrated about getting woken up in the middle of the night. The commotion caught my attention because I was still awake, like I said, dealing with insomnia. Seconds after they got to the living room, my mom came barging into my room, telling me to get down on the floor and stay there. I immediately did as she said. I began to listen intently for whatever this mysterious threat may have been that caused all this ruckus. I could hear my dad's voice. He was on the phone with the police. Soon after that, I saw blue and red lights flashing through my window. I listened as best I could, but only found out the details later. What I was later told was happening was that a bunch of gang members were initiating someone by beating the crap out of them in our front lawn. You recall I said I hadn't been sleeping well in the nights leading up to this point. That was mainly because I'd been seeing strange, unsettling things happening in my room. Somehow, the shadows would move on their own. It happened a lot. I know how our eyes can play tricks on us in the dark, like how a chair can look like someone crouching by your bed, or a hanging coat might look like the silhouette of a person. But these distinct shapes I was seeing were in places that I had no such furniture. And these things, they were active, completely, hauntingly silent, but active. I watched something crawl around on all fours like a person trying to mimic the movements of an animal. I once saw something in the shape of a small boy about 4 feet tall, with what looked like a bowl-style haircut, if that makes sense. The shadow boy walked in through my door, stared at me, and then just walked back out. I'm the youngest of my 3 siblings, and the older 2 were both grown and out of the house when these instances were occurring. As far as I know, I'm the only one who ever saw things like this in the house. So, on this particular evening, the night of the gang attack, as I laid flat on my bedroom floor, I saw the last shadow I would ever see in that room. Unlike other times, though, this one appeared to sort of reverse melt out of the shadows that stretched across the ground near the foot of my bed. It was silhouetted against the rest of the darkness. It glided up and across my wall, its profile cartoonishly distinct. I could clearly make out an extremely hunched back, a crooked neck, and gigantic, misshapen nose on its head. Unlike the others, as well, it didn't seem to acknowledge me at all. It simply moved across the wall from one corner to the next, before disappearing entirely, unlike the ones that usually seem to try to interact with me at some point, or at least observe me. The whole thing left me feeling disturbed, wondering why these things so often decide to wander through my personal space. The next incident happened when I was 18 or 19 years old. As far as I can remember, I don't recall anything strange happening in the lead up to this event. I just know it happened during those strange moments between the states of consciousness and sleep. As I was laying in bed, I woke up, extremely groggy and trying to decide if I had to get up or not, to pee. It was dark, with only the little light from the street lamps bleeding in from my window. I heard the unexpected sound of a person whistling, wafting in from our living room. It sounded like the tune of Rockabye Baby, but I couldn't be sure because of how fuzzy everything was with my senses. I couldn't hear anything else. No accompanying footsteps, no rustling of clothing, just a suspiciously isolated, disembodied whistling sound. My door was about 2 feet away from the foot of my bed. I shut it before I went to bed, so the whistling was a little muffled. As I laid there, trying to convince myself that I was even really hearing anything at all, the knob of my bedroom door began to turn. I looked over toward the door, expecting to see my dad or mom standing behind it. But as the door opened, my heart suddenly started to race. There was no one on the other side when it swung open all the way. The door opened on its own, revealing the dark expanse of the hallway beyond it. Needless to say, I was definitely wide awake after that. Like I said, I have no way of knowing whether the whistling incident was connected to the hag, the shadow of whom I saw on the wall in my room, but I've always somehow felt this underlying similarity between the two moments in my life. When I think about it, I am often reminded of stories like that of Hansel and Gretel, where witches were said to lure and kidnap children. It makes me wonder if perhaps the spirit of something has had its eye on me for a long time. I've had no experience like this since. I suppose it might be because my adult mind has been closed off to those types of things. With all the stress and obligations of adulthood, having a family of my own to provide for example, I guess that's what happens to most of us. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to listen to my story. Yours truly, Zach. Alright, my friends, I'm going to get into my thoughts about this interesting story. Then, we'll check out what the dreamers listening to the live show have to say. There's so much we can say about the existence of these so-called shadow people. Some days when I look at these types of stories, I feel as if I've said all there is for me to say. But then, something amazing happens. I'm inspired by the words and thoughts of people like my dreamers whose unique insights often help bring my mind and imagination to places I never knew I could venture. The questions and ideas that come to mind regarding this story are many, in my case. For one, I wondered how it must feel as a child to find yourself surrounded by these ethereal beings, things you could never touch, or at least one would hope you could never touch. Imagine for a moment, you lived in a world where every time you went to try to sleep, the shadows around you came alive with motion and even personality in some cases. When Zach described his brief encounter with a little boy-like shadow creature, it reminded me of one of the last times I saw such a thing myself. Although it wasn't a completely shadow entity, this is what came to mind. One night as I awoke from my sleep, a gentle waddling movement caught my eye, just over the edge of the footboard of my bed, past my feet. It was the shape of a head, bobbing as if walking by. The shape rounded the corner of my bed, revealing the image of what looked to be a toddler, barely taller than the height of my bed itself. However, that's when I began to notice some disturbing elements here at play. The skin of this toddler-shaped being appeared to be made of some sort of sparkling black, sand-like substance. It glittered faintly in the darkness of my room. I looked to where its eyes would be, and they appeared to be jewels darker than the blackest shadow, but jewels that reflected the little ambient light that was available in the room, with perfectly hewn facets in each one. The child reached out to me and took my hand, which I suddenly realized was hanging off the edge of my bed. At that point was when I realized I was also suffering from an episode of sleep paralysis. Unable to move anything but my eyes, I watched as the child lifted my wrist to its face. I began to feel the pressure of blunt teeth biting and sinking into the skin of the flesh of my hand. The pain increased until it was unbearable, my eyes wild with panic that couldn't translate anywhere else in my body. As I recall, I lost consciousness and woke up normally several hours later, with no markings or other evidence of what I'd been through. That's what came to mind as I read this story. I also wondered about the image of the shadow woman on the wall, why it left such an impression on Zach. that he would connect it to an apparently unrelated event, even years later. I can only imagine the intuitional feeling that it must have brought on. Very interesting to think about. So, my friend, what do you think about this story? Do you think that the two incidents, the shadow hag and the opening door, are connected? How would you imagine that to be so? Do you believe in the existence of shadow people at all? If you do, what do you think they might be? And lastly, have you ever been visited by a shadowy figure in the night? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Now, I'll open up the floor to the dreamers to weigh in. Remember, if you want your chance at your question or comment showing up in a future video, or the chance to sponsor a video with a super chat, turn on notifications so that you can catch the live reading and discussion. Alright, so, dreamer listening live Samantha says, I didn't get to hear all of the story, but ghosts latching on when they're losing power, they sometimes get desperate and haunting becomes more frequent. It's like we're feeding them when we give them attention. That's a really interesting point because it's a very, very interesting concept there Samantha raises, because when it comes to shadow people and shadow versus ghosts, like even in this case, I describe this as sort of a ghost encounter because I'm not really sure what Zach was dealing with at the time of this story, especially given the fact that he was having all these strange, shadowy figures swirling around his room at random different times. And then the second encounter specifically seemed more like a standard, pure, ghostly encounter. There were no shadows involved in that one, but something about it, there's some kind of connection that Zach makes mentally or emotionally that connects the two. Or maybe it's just those are two of the strangest situations that he's ever been in, so he naturally assumes that they are connected. I don't know. But I would imagine if shadow people are their own intelligent or sentient entities, they would potentially be able to feed off of our energy somehow, or our attention, or the fear or the anxiety that they cause in humans. I could imagine that as being a possibility. Anything's really possible, so I'm really not one to say what is or is not the case. But like I always say, that's what makes these things so much fun and so interesting to talk about, because the possibilities are literally endless. So thank you for that comment, Samantha. Toriko says, I wonder how much the violence in the area contributed to the events. Could the gang activity have fed into the shadow person activity? Now that is a really interesting idea, a connection that I've never really come across when talking about shadow people, because none of the shadow people stories that I've heard, nor that I've received personally, have mentioned the social situation around the actual area where the shadow people are seen. It could very well be that there's something about the energies of that location, the violence and the vitriol that people experience in there, that does actually, cause that place to be more viable for shadow people to exist, or make it more worth their while. I really don't know. I really don't know what their requirements are, but it's definitely a really interesting thing to think about. Alright, so with that, we're going to close out this story and this video, my friends. I hope you're having a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day, your night, whatever it is, whatever time you're listening to this. Stay safe. Be the best person you can be, the best version of yourself you can be. And remember, here comes the code word. And I hesitate to say this, it makes me a little queasy, because I'm the one who was the victim of this. But I believe it was Dreamer and Red Skull member Ambar that said nom nom nom, because of the fact that I was nommed on by a demon shadow baby child, or as Samantha called it, the biting child, which is an extremely unsettling name, a very unsettling name to call something that I directly interacted with. I hope I never see the biting child again, but in the meantime, use the code word nom 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 if you are listening to this portion of the video. Take care, my friends. I'll see you soon. All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and share. If you made it to the very end, you're exactly the kind of subscriber I'm looking for. Don't forget to turn on those notifications. That way, you can catch the live show and discuss the stories with me. Your input might even appear in my next video. Last thing, if you heard a code word after the story, type it in a comment down below so I know who the real dreamers are. Take care, my friend. Until next time.